It's finally here on my list of my favorite fiction reads for 2022, which means that I'm also going to make a list of my favorite non-fiction reads for 2022, but that'll come later. Let's just jump right in, and at number 10 we have The Thursday Murder Club by Richard Osman. Of course, this may be one of the most sold books like 2 years ago, and I read this quite early last year. It's about 4 older people in a retirement village in England. They spend their Thursdays together trying to solve unsolved murders, and suddenly one murder is happening around them, and they try to solve that one. One of the reasons why I chose this one and loved it is because of the setup. It's just the right combination of cozy and exciting. They're all lovable characters and they have their own quirks. I find this very useful for me as a reader to set them apart from each other, and especially when talking about mystery novels, I like to have a clear picture of who's who in the novels. Also, a thing I enjoyed is how well the place is described. It seemed very cozy and I got a very clear mental picture of how that village looked. And of course it has its twists and turns. So a feel-good novel, but also with a seriousness, because they're older people and they have things to struggle with, like their past and their bodies. So in total it's a fun reading experience, and that's why it's at number 10. The next one on the list is sort of a novel I found after digging some, because I really wanted to get into fantasy and I thought that urban fantasy might be the way for me to really engage in the genre. And when trying to Google, one novel came up all the time, and that's this one, Rivers of London by Ben Arnovich. This one is about a police officer in London called Peter Grant. He's investigating a murder when suddenly a ghost appears, and he's wondering, what are you? And when he reports back, he's sort of told that he doesn't belong in this division, he should seek out the magical part of the London police, where we have one other person that has been alone for a long time, and it shows. This is a part of a series, and in the first one it's all about establishing what's going to happen in the next ones. So they're solving a specific crime, but at the same time it's more about what's his role going forward. And it was so much fun. He is not the brightest, but he has this bright friend that sort of helps him, so him being not that smart is something I find enjoyable. Also, it feels like you're getting a historical tour of London, because London is described in such a loving way. It makes me think that Ben doesn't leave London that much. I don't know if he lives there, but if he lives far away, that would surprise me. Another thing that sort of surprised me is how rich the language is. So he uses a lot of words that I don't usually read in fantasy novels, and I found it very enjoyable. It makes me sort of more indulged with the story. Just a plus with this book, because the language isn't the reason why I picked it up. Probably because of the fast paced and the humor, and it has a lot of both. So that's number 9. And now for the serious one on the list, and one of Norway's biggest exports, and that's History of Bees by Maja Lunde. This is the first book in the Climate Quartet, where it's 4 books all about one specific topic related to climate change. And as you might have guessed, this one is about bees. We follow 3 storylines, one set in the future, one in the past, and one in the present. What they all have in common is that they're centered around beekeepers. But in many ways, the 3 different stories aren't that similar at all, and the futuristic one is the one that really got me. Here we meet a family that loses their child, and they live in this very dystopian place, and it made it feel very fast paced. So even though people say that this book is kind of slow, I didn't feel that in any way, because that future story just got hold of me and took me along for the journey. Also, I may not be the most hopeful when it comes to climate change, and maybe my mood got a bit darker when I read the story, and I felt like things are getting worse. And the most important thing about this novel is maybe the new perspective you get. Even though I've thought about losing arts and species as a part of climate change, it gets very real when you read this novel. I hope more people will read this novel. I'm surely going to read the second novel about oceans this year, and I hope that one will be as good as this one. The next novel is the only children's novel on the list, and that's Gangster Granny by David Walliams. I've read some of his books last year and the year before, but none of them had the same depth as this one. So Ben here visits his grandmother each week when his parents go to watch Dancing with the Stars. He's really unhappy with this until he finds out that she has been an international jewel thief, and together they're now going to steal the crown jewels. I would say that this is a slow starter, but in this case I find it to be necessary and fun, because you really feel like she is the most boring grandmother ever. She makes horrible food, they do little to no activity, and it's all a bit boring. But when this one picks up the pace, it's really fun, engaging, exciting, and heartwarming. Often David Walliams is talked about in the same sentence as Roald Dahl, or he's expected to become the next Roald Dahl. In his other novels I haven't really felt that, but in this one I did, and mainly because it's the same amount of fun for kids as grown-ups. Also worth mentioning that this got its sequel this year, so I'm really looking forward to reading that as well. At number 6 we have a book that won the Nordic Council Literature Prize in 2016, I think, and it's Hotel Silence by Audur Ava Olafsdottir. This novel is about a middle-aged man that wants to commit suicide, but it doesn't really manage to do so. Instead, he travels to a war-torn country and thinks that, well, if I step on a landmine, that wouldn't be the worst thing. And in this country that's trying to rebuild itself after war, he goes to this hotel called Hotel Silence. He's a handyman, and suddenly he finds himself just helping them with everything they need to help them fix the hotel again. This is definitely my kind of plot. It's very dark at the same time as it's funny, and it's not really clear if you're supposed to be happy or sad when you read this novel. It's somewhere in between, and for this novel it really works. Also, you have this enormously lovable character. He's kind, he helps people with fixing things, he's sad, he just wants to end it all, but he stays on and helps people. What more can you ask for? So maybe this is one of those books that's least surprising that I liked. We're halfway through, and here we find a new modern Norwegian classic, and it's Zeshan, Shakar and Tante Ulrikkes vei. This is about two young men with immigrant parents growing up in Oslo, and specifically the part of Oslo that's often associated with low-income families and bad school results. Our main characters are part of a project where they record cassettes and send them off to a researcher or a social worker that's going to make a project talking about how it is growing up in this place in Oslo. And not surprising, one of our main characters is struggling more than the other. I think maybe the form of this novel is something I enjoyed the most, how engaging it was hearing those two boys talking to this third person that they don't know, and switching between those two characters at variable paces made it feel more intense, because you sort of can regulate the intensity of the novel with switching between them at certain times. So that was something I thought was very cool, and I think it was important for me to listen to this on audiobook just because the language was so slangy that I don't know if I would have understood it if I actually read the words in this novel. Of course, you have a ton of coming-of-age stories from Oslo. The only issue is that every one of those is written by people in the same situation. Often they're men, often they're middle-aged now, and they come from middle-class families. Shakar comes from an immigrant family himself, and the viewpoints of this novel is totally different from anything I've read before. One thing I liked about the boys in the book is that they come from the same background, but they're totally different, and it just tells a better story about how we humans are not alike at all. Even though I just commented that you wouldn't have read all the books from all the men in their 50s and 60s. So that's number 5. And now over to one of my favorite authors, and that's Fredrik Backman, Britt Marie Was Here. The book starts with Britt Marie walking away from her husband. He has been cheating and he's a total jerk, and she just leaves. But the thing is that Britt Marie has never really had anything to do besides being his wife. And now she's sitting across from a social worker trying to figure out her life. But her problem is that she's not a very pleasant person. She is kind of rude, she doesn't have those social skills you might expect, she doesn't like untidiness, and there are many things about her that you don't really like. And the social worker is one of those people that's not very fond of her. she does kind of strange things. But Britt-Marie needs to work, and the only thing she finds is a recreational center for youth. The social worker doesn't think that this is a good idea, but Britt-Marie has made up her mind. This is what she's doing now. And the rest of the story is her journey with her new job and meeting the kids at the recreation center. It's going to be sweet. This one has the same energy as a lot of Fredrik Backman's novels. You start out with not loving the person as much as you do when you finish reading it. And you're not surprised at all when you finish reading it and find yourself being in love with the main character. Because Britt-Marie slowly reveals in this novel why she has become the way she has. And that's mainly why you want to read this novel. It's all about her and her character development and the cute children and the lovable characters that she meets along the way. Britt-Marie is actually a character from another Fredrik Backman novel, which I never remember the name of, so I'll just put it on the screen. And in that one she's also not that lovable, but she grows from that novel to this one and from this one till the end of this one. So you have the full journey if you read the other one. So that was number 4. Then it's time to hand out the medals, and before I reveal book number 3, this is a book that I didn't think I wanted on this list because it feels too cliché. I know that many of these books are quote-unquote simple books, and I get that. I'm fine with it, but the next one is just a tad too much. But if I'm being completely honest with myself, I truly enjoyed the feeling of listening to this next novel. So, without further ado, the next one is Terry Hayes and I Am Pilgrim. And I actually made a separate review of this book on this channel, and after I finished that one as well, it felt like I didn't actually love it, but I did. It's just one of those books I truly enjoyed. It's about this super duper spy investigating a murder in New York, but ending up traveling around the world and hunting terrorists. I'm not going to deep dive any further into the plot right now because that would just take up too much time, but let's just say it's very Hollywood. This one has a lot of 1-star reviews on Goodreads and a lot of slaughtery reviews. And I get that, especially if you're not expecting Hollywood, and that's of course what you get. Also, some people mention that it has problematic worldviews, and I could imagine. I'm just not bright enough to see it myself. All in all, this is one of the best audiobooks experiences I had all year. I think at one point I spent around 10 hours continuously listening to this because it was so fast-paced and so exciting. There's so many storylines, but they're all very easy to follow, and they end up in a big explosion of things happening. So, had a lot of fun with this one, but it feels strange having this at number 3 this year. But I'm trying to become more honest with myself. The second place goes to a novel that I don't feel bad about having on this list today, and that's Summerlight and Then Comes the Night by Jon Kalmar Stefansson. This one I read earlier this year, but I just kept on thinking about it the whole year through. Not the book necessarily, but the feeling I got when I read it. And that's the same thing. It's about this village in Iceland with about 400 people living in it. You get to watch these people from the outside and experience their issues. For example, if the stars are aligning in the right way, or if your husband is cheating on you. There are a lot of different problems they have. It's maybe a bit chaotic, and that's what I like about it. When I finished reading it, I just sat with the feeling that now I've read something that I truly enjoyed. Not something specifically because the plot is a bit messy if there is a plot. It's just a good feeling of having read a book that's well written about a lot of things, just like this video. So this book is kind of funny with all the quirky people you meet, but the main thing about this novel is how they take a small village and look at the stars and makes the village grander than it is, in a sense. Because the focus lies outside of this small village, but at the same time you get a deep dive into the people instead of just looking at the village as a village. You'll just have to read this novel. It's glorious. I think I'll stop there with those wise words. For those of you that watch my videos, my favorite novel of 2022 shouldn't come as a surprise, even though it still can, because I talk in diffuse terms sometimes. But nevertheless, it's Fredrik Backman again, and this time with Beartown. Beartown is a small community in Sweden where everything revolves around the hockey team, and specifically the junior hockey team. This team has this one star player that does something incredibly stupid, and this stupid thing makes the whole town go crazy, mostly because he is not able to play hockey anymore for them, which makes you insane while reading it. So this book is the first one in a trilogy, and I would say that it's mostly about winners and losers. The winners that got to move away from this place, the losers that stayed, and the town itself is a losing town, and all the people are hoping that the hockey team will make them feel like winners again. And a lot of things are at stake for the teams to win trophies and make them famous again. I don't think I've ever read a book where it was this obvious that I was going to love this book from the start, because I hadn't read a lot of pages before I understood that, well, this one is going on my top 10 list for this year. And when I finished it, I told myself that, well, this is number one. So all the books on this top 10 list I found to be very, very enjoyable, but this one is just at a different level for me. And it's not my usual cup of tea, because this is not a happy novel. It's quite dark and intense, I would say. I think the main reason why I love this one so much is how Bachmann forces you to feel bad for the children. There are a lot of children and they all have their own stories, and few of them are very happy, and that makes you as a reader very unhappy yourself. Also, there are a lot of asshole adults in this story, which makes you want to adopt the children. Bachmann has this thing where he likes to take your emotions and beat them, and then repair you afterwards. And now I'm of course afraid of reading the sequel. So, why? So these were my favorite fiction reads from last year. Do you have any favorites from last year? Please comment below if you want to. And if you strongly disagree with me on any of these picks, please comment below so we can argue. And thank you for watching this channel. If you like this video, please consider subscribing, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!